Hi, I'm Melanie,
And I'm Kimberly.
and today we're going to be talking about Alice Paul. Alice Paul was a woman suffrage activist in the 1920s.
And she was committed to giving women the basic rights such as voting and to be able to work. So she was the one who mainly fought for the 19th Amendment.
Okay, so we're going to ask each other questions. The first question is, what is Alice Paul known for?
So Alice Paul is one of the most prominent activists of the 20th century for women's rights. She was a very outspoken person in which she had led many movements and protests for women's suffrage. At some point, the police did have to arrest and imprison Paul several times due to the involvement with the group, in which whenever she had forever changed by her experiences and she changed many people's lives. But later on, Alice Paul did return to the United States in 1910 and she turned her attention to American suffrage movement, and that was mainly her focus on women's rights. Okay, so our next question is, what does the 19th Amendment do for women?
Okay, during the early history of America, um, women were denied the basic rights enjoyed by male citizens, but the 19th Amendment had legalized um, the right to vote for American women, which is known as the women's suffrage. Vote had become the main focus in the women's rights movements. Many activists tried to raise public awareness to persuade the government to give voting rights to all women. The campaign for women's suffrage was a growing movement in the decades way before the Civil War, and many women played a huge role in the abolition movement and religious groups.
So, not a lot of people are familiar with Alice Paul or what she did.
She isn't necessarily the face of the women's suffrage or feminism or any of that.
But we do have two more questions that we are going to answer so that people are more familiar with Alice Paul.
And our opinion on why she should be the face of anything. The first question is, why isn't Alice Paul talked about?
So, according to many articles, people don't know who Alice Paul is because she didn't leave any journals and she never gave interviews. She was an introverted person who didn't see her as her own story should be something that should be shared about or that has to be out there. She felt like it was something that people in general had to know, and it wasn't something that she had to teach people, but something that they should have known in general. So the next question is, why should Alice Paul be the face of feminism?
Alice Paul should be the face of feminism as she is the vocal leader for the 20th century during the women's suffrage movement. She advocated and helped secure the passage for the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. In my opinion, Alice Paul should be the face of feminism because she is one of the main people that advocated for women's rights. She led the charge for women's suffrage and equal rights in the United States. She was a wonderful leader and activist and should be known throughout history.
And now we're going to go interview one of our very own history teachers, Mr. Narwhal, and ask him a couple of questions about our topic.
What did the 19th Amendment do for women?
It was probably the worst amendment that the United States ever passed, allowing women the right to vote. It's been a setback. Our country's never recovered from it. After 1920, let's see, we had the Great Depression, we had the Dust Bowl in America, we had World War II, we had the Korean War, let's not forget the, what else? The Vietnam War happened. This is all after women got the right to vote.
Oh, so you think it's
Wait,
a problem?
wait, I'm not finished yet. You think I'm done? I barely got started. And we had 9/11, we had the war in Afghanistan.
That was an extension.
Everything is just, nothing's going right. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. I'm just kidding. Actually, women should have gotten the right to vote in America a long, long time ago.
Are you recording?
Okay? You can go back to Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, when they were writing the Constitution, and she said, "Don't forget about the women." Of course, they did.
Next question. What do you know?
It's important.
Wait.
The 19th Amendment is one of the best amendments we ever had.
What do you know about the women's suffrage movement?
Well, there was a lot of suffering. Actually, quite a bit. You know, you can go back to Susan B. Anthony in the middle of the 19th century. One of the leaders, you know, she would go to jail to fight for her right to vote, and she never did get the right to vote. She died before the 19th Amendment was passed. It was a strong movement. It was also tied in with the anti-slavery movement because women saw themselves almost being treated as slaves. So it's been, you know, really started in the early 1800s. It took like 100 years before it really happened.
What do you know about Alice Paul?
She was one of the leaders of the women's suffrage movement. She was jailed on numerous occasions. I know when she went to England, she joined a suffrage movement there, and she was jailed, and they actually force-fed her because she went on what's it called, a fast protest, and made her very ill. She came back to the United States, and was a leader. We're having a meeting. And she was one of the leaders of the suffragette movement, especially, you know, in the early 1900s. She, you know, led protests in front of Washington D.C. of the Capitol. Very, very one of the great leaders for the movement.
What's your opinion on her?
I admire her. She went through a lot of adversity. You know, not only was she you know, jailed several times for believing what she believed in. You know, the women suffragettes, women looking for the right to vote, were ridiculed by men on many occasions, and you know, she stood up against that. So yeah, she's a great woman.
Women's rights is a topic still being discussed and fought for to this day. Women's rights activists continue the fight for full equality and basic human rights, for all women to have an equal opportunity. Alice Paul is one of the many amazing women who fought for women's rights and will remain to be an icon and role model for all women.